of the Republic invites you to our road to G20 conversation today through public dialogue and community participation. As a university that carries the name of our country, we do not take lightly the responsibility that we have in ensuring that not only do we make the diplomatic community present in our city feel welcome, but as a university as well, we create platforms where we are able to engage with our international community. It gives me great pleasure that today we have no less than 26 embassies present. Say hello. Welcome. Some brought up to 4 strong person delegation to be here today. That we'll spend this morning until lunch together talking about the G20. From UNISA, of course, our Vice-Chancellor is here, supported by a strong delegation of her own office, the Vice Principals. Several of them are here, sitting and huddling next to her, making sure that she's well and looked after, and she gets to do what she needs to do today. UNISA, I do not want, and also the Diplomatic Corps, I do not want to steal the limelight from Vice-Chancellor. Please forgive me for doing it. I'm going to do it anyway. Today, we are happy to announce, and this I think is useful information for members of the Diplomatic Corps as well, to say that at UNISA, issues and setting the ground. Let me take the opportunity to welcome you all to the University of South Africa. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Masocha Mguni, the G20 Overall Substance Coordinator from the International Relations DIRCO office, who's actually the greatest of partners that we are quite appreciative, because Ambassador Diseko, as you say, he's the one who's coordinating all the aspects of G20 in terms of the practice and the praxis or content, so we're quite appreciative. Let me recognize Mr. Mushutu Mwepa, the IEC chairperson, who's amongst us here, and the executive leaders that are with him. Let me recognize Ambassador Nosipo Gakato Tiseko, Ambassador in Residence at the University of South Africa, and former Ambassador at Large for Peace and Security, Human Rights and Development, who's also doing great work for the African Union and the United Nations, representing the best of Africa. The members of MENCOM, Management Committee of the University of South Africa, Professor Solomon Mahanu. Can I request you to stand? I think people come to UNISA, they don't even know who is the executive leadership if they don't research. Because if you research, you'll know. But I'd like you to stand up so that they see you. Professor Mahanu, the Vice Principal, Institutional Advancement, Professor Seputa, the University Registrar. Thank you. Ms. Nakene Mlinga, the CIO of the university. If our technology is good, that's the lady that's in charge. Let me recognize Professor Siku, Eunice Siku, responsible for teaching and learning at UNISA. Are there any other DVCs? If not here, the others colleagues are in other responsibilities, and therefore, thank you, colleagues, for being here. Of course, we would like to recognize members of the Diplomatic Corps, representing various South African diplomats. We recognize the presence of the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Umar. So thank you very much, Ambassador, for being here, the Dean. Professor Cheryl Hendricks, Executive Director, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Dr. Pilani Mthembu, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue, also quite central to the thinking or thought leadership around the role of South Africa as a leader in G20. So thank you for being here. Our two panelists, Professor Dirk Coetzee, who is known professor of political sciences at UNISA, and Dr. Bongio Mphahlele from the Thabo Mbeki School for Public and International Affairs at UNISA, a young scholar who's very vibrant. So I look forward. UNISA is cooking something, colleagues. If you're not seeing, there's a rise of strong intellectuals that are quite creating great shifts, and I'm quite appreciative. Our moderator, Mr. Tali Muzedzi, Ubuntu Radio, DIRCO, Mr. Mguni. This was the training ground for him, so you should be aware of that contribution. We have the National Student Representative Council. I see their student president, Mr. Nkosinathi Mabilani, who's representing the students and all other student structures of the university. The business community, civil society, political parties, research institutes, institutions of higher learning, various organizations and foundations that have honored our invitation in person, but also virtually. Representatives of various media houses present here, and I recognize the national broadcasters' representation. Members of the university communities are staff, academicians, professional, administrative staff, and our esteemed guests present here this morning, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I should say, perhaps that should have been the end of my speech. But because this is a diplomatic environment, we are always told that it's important to respect the protocols and not do all protocols. What's that? Yes. So I have recused myself from that practice because I'm told it's quite important. We welcome you to the launch of the G20 Community Engagement Town Hall, which is co-hosted by the University of South Africa and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. We're quite appreciative that DIRCO has seen us as an important partner in rallying and mobilizing the participation of communities, in being attentive to the diverse communities, sectors, ideation, but also the imagination on what the contribution of South Africa to multilateralism, to questions, the grand questions of our times on the geopolitical and decisions that have to be undertaken to ensuring that humanity and the planet that we live in are cradling us to thriving. Our strategic collaboration with DIRCO aligns with the importance we attach to being a university that carries the name of the country and that is deeply rooted in the African thought, philosophy, Pan-Africanism, and the idea that we are all human. We're a university that is committed to reclaiming Africa's intellectual futures into the next 150 years and beyond. We take very seriously our location in the national capital, which hosts most of the diplomatic missions, as well as being located in 26 regions and in 130 countries' footprint. That's where our students are in the world. And therefore, the G20 and multilateralism, or the role of South Africa as a partner in the thinking, in the practice of humanizing cultures, of creating environments for engagement, is quite central to how we envision and how we articulate our teaching and learning, research, and engaged scholarship. And therefore, we are pleased to see several embassies represented here this morning. We are a university born on the continent which has global reach by being able to operate in most regions of the world. We must therefore live up to our global character by contributing to thought leadership, to global affairs, and to ensuring that UNISA, as a national treasure with a global reach, is a partner to our government in thinking through our role as the presidents in the presidency of the G20. South Africa assumed presidency of the G20 from December 2024 to November 2025 under the theme Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability. At no point could have been a theme such as this central when the bifurcations of societies in the local and global systems are becoming very evident. It is precisely, therefore, that this important theme is invitational not only to South Africans but to the world around how we rally together to ensuring that solidarity, equality, and sustainability are articulated. It is the first time that the G20 is hosted by an African country. Part of the G20 presidency includes hosting, I thought you'd at least give a round of applause to South Africa. I thought as a pathfinder like UNISA, it's very important to acknowledge when you make historical transformations to systems that often would not have taken seriously our contribution. So can I repeat? It is the first time that the G20 is hosted by an African country. I'm very appreciative. Part of the G20 presidency includes hosting a summit of heads of states, which is scheduled to take place on 30th November 2025 in Cape Town. Dr. Phulani Mthembu, who will deliver the vote of thanks today, is the Executive Director of Institute for Global Dialogue, which is associated with our university. We congratulate the IGD for being appointed as one of the 3 think tanks to coordinate the Think 20 South Africa. It could not have been a better organization than the IGD, precisely because it was founded by the first democratic president to actually engender intellectual thought, ideation, research as important partners to policy and decision-making systems in our country, but also in influencing the world. Dr. Phulani Mthembu, congratulations. The other 2 institutions are the South African Institute of International Affairs and the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. And we congratulate our colleagues, our sister university, for also being a partner in this important journey. Community engagement is one of the central pillars of any university in the world. For us in South Africa, is important because it enables us to locate our knowledge in the communities through which we would like to impact through our science, our research, our knowledge, and therefore the collaboration with DIRCO is one example of how communities in international relations become important partners in the community engagement town halls, which will reach the provinces of our country, but also our continent. Because for us as UNISA, we don't just think of our local context, as we have this reach, including centers in Ethiopia, presence in Eritrea, in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere. So it's very important that you understand that role. The overarching theme has already been discussed, as I've stated, and therefore requires us to emphasize our interconnectedness in addressing the global challenges, but also the need for collective action. Equally important is addressing systemic disparities, promoting social justice on the global scale, mediating the binaries and bifurcations that are experienced all over the world, including through violence, wars, discrimination, prejudice, and economic decisions that alienate others. The issue of sustainability cannot be overemphasized. All of us sitting here have somewhat been affected by the climatic changes, ecological degradation, or sometimes the delayed implementation systems on how this could be addressed. Equally important, integrating economic development, social inclusion, environmental protection for long-term health and sustainability. In the G20 discourse, the logic is integrating economic growth. But if you're a political science scholar or political economy scholar, you know that economic growth is not adequate a measure of economic transformation. And therefore, for us, because we're in a university, we think it will be constructive to also engage on the language, the nomenclatures, the policy positions that will be taken, and to look whether they steer us forward. Finally, colleagues, I will ensure that even though my speech would have been 11 pages, I'm summarizing because I'm excited. No, I'll summarize it, we'll post it, you'll read it. I'm summarizing it because I'm looking forward to the presentations, the discussions, the debates that will be tabled by the speakers. And therefore, I want to conclude by saying the theme of the event today is subsequent provincial community 20 community engagement. Is South Africa in Africa and the world, global governance, peace, justice, human rights, and security. For us, the global system of governance is under tremendous pressure. It is not yet clear if the next country that should take over the G20 presidency will even attend the summit. That's one of the critical questions, but I know that the diplomat, for us as scholars, it's a point of engagement. For you, the diplomats, I know it's a sensitive question. So I think we're going to engage in a balanced approach where diplomacy is asserted and yet where scholarship is also not compromised. That's a complex dialogue, but it is necessary because we are in a university. South Africa's presidency, therefore, takes place at the time when there are multiple contestations, serious contestations, when there are shifts in the geopolitical space. And sometimes it's difficult to predict what type of world these contestations will lead to. South Africa, and indeed the world, is still experiencing socio-economic challenges that seem to have been exacerbated or heightened by the last few months. For us as UNISA, we have lost some financial assistance that we would have had to ensuring that the YALI program, which is the Young African Leadership Program that was supported by USAID, which allowed UNISA to have a footprint and to engage with young people in the continent, has been derailed. What have we done about it? We have rallied around the resources of our university, but also our society, to ensure that such important agenda is not lost only because donations are not coming or partnership support is not available. The right to equality and much cherished principle of diversity, equality, and inclusion is being done away with in many countries. We gloss over justice questions. Sometimes we are not attentive to even the successes that the diplomacy would have gained in how we define, for instance, genocide, how we define peace and security, how we see the value or the humanity of others, and equally the human rights that are required to being affirmed. And therefore, it's quite important that this G20 meeting that our country will be hosting will start through this message of solidarity, of equality, and of sustainability, bring this humanizing principle into the center. The Kenyan proverb says, peace is costly, but it is worth the expense. Peace is costly, but it is worth the expense. And I think this is precisely because in the logic of Ubuntu, we cannot be human if others are not human. We are inextricably bound to our ecology, and therefore, if we don't take care of our ecology and its sustainability, we will grapple with climatic changes. And therefore, what are the decisions that we make, whether economic, environmental, social, political, and others? Finally, the opportunity for the G20 presidency is to leverage for South Africa and the continent towards ensuring that the global solutions are not inattentive of the pursuit of meaning, of being human in a world, including in a world that's digitizing and sometimes alienating the cognitive but also intentional participation of others. What is the role of participation in democracy in multilateral systems? How do we ensure that the multiple voices sing together and find convergence, and where they are contesting each other, it is with dignity and not marginalizing others? How do we ensure that access to education contributes significantly to the sustainable development goals that are at the center of our thinking around multilateralism? How do we ensure that science diplomacy, which means the intersection of science and diplomacy, remains a focus that universities, but also the diplomats, are attentive to? As we discuss the ideas of economic diplomacy, do we see the relevance of science as an important arena of diplomacy? And therefore, for us as the University of South Africa, we have identified 10 catalytic niche areas of health studies, of aviation and marine sciences, of other sciences such as nanotechnologies and biotechnologies, to try to answer to some of the immediate questions with yourselves. We see the realm and the role of artificial intelligence in the digitization systems, machine learning, and associated technologies. Will the G20 look into some of this, particularly if we take into cognizance that many of these digital developments, whether as tools, as software, as devices, are generally owned by the countries in the global north and perhaps China and Korea? What does that mean for the world and for accessing these tools for peace, for justice, for solidarity and sustainability? Thank you very much, colleagues. I hope that the colleagues who will be engaging in the discussions will be able to help us to understand some of these issues, including the socio-economic, political, climatic, digital, educational, and energy or environmental and minerals aspects and trade and investment aspects of the G20 and their implications. Just 2 weeks ago, we have learned new things around our biotic resources, our natural resources, and the decisions that other countries are making. What do these mean? And what does diplomacy have to do about them? These are the questions that we hope Ambassador DIRCO, your respondents, the Sherpa, Mr. Mguni, after your engagements with the scholar, will go back and go deeper to dig the archives as we imagine the future with you. Thank you. Welcome to UNISA, the University of Leaders, the home of President Mandela, the founding forebear of our democracy in South Africa. So is the case with the current presidency and the Chancellor of the University of South Africa, His Excellency President Becky. But I'm sure all of you who are leaders here, if you have not registered with UNISA, you'd have missed out. So even you ambassadors, one module will be quite interesting on how to locate yourself in the continent of Africa. All the best. Welcome to UNISA. Enjoy yourselves. Be at home. Know that all of us from UNISA are willing and able to support you in any way that you'd like. I'm told that the washrooms are on the right side, if you did not know, for all of us. Also, if you want to get your coffee or tea, please don't feel uncomfortable. Here at home, meaning in the African continent, we break bread together as a testament of our interconnectedness, and that tea is part of that conversation. Welcome.
Well, let's give her another round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Vice Chancellor. Ladies and gentlemen, just let me do this disclaimer. It was not on purpose that I am matching with the DIRCO today. As you'll see on the table, there is some black and white going on here. Please believe it or not, I had nothing to do with the DIRCO, and it was not intentional for my outfit to be matching completely with the decoration. Anyway, thank you indeed, Vice Chancellor. We thank you for welcoming our guests and indeed positioning us as a university and in collaboration with DIRCO and also the diplomatic community to say what it is that we'd like to do in our contribution to ensure that our country is well supported as it hosts the G20. When I was acknowledging participants earlier, I should have also acknowledged Professor Edith Paswana right here from the Thabo Mbeki School, because indeed, as we work today hosting this event, the Thabo Mbeki African School for Public and International Affairs has been quite instrumental in supporting us and ensuring that today's program runs very smoothly. We now would love to call to the podium Mr. Mnguni, who's the G20 overall project coordinator, to come and let us know more about what is in store for us as a country as far as the G20 is concerned and what preparations, state of preparedness, etc. are we to host this very important global event that's coming up. Thank you, Mr. Mnguni.
Thank you very much, Program Facilitator, Ms. Maureen Tong, the Director for Special Projects and International Relations in the Office of the VC. Good morning, colleagues. As has been said, my name is Masocha Mnguni. I'm the Director at DIRCO, responsible, amongst others, for the G20, where I serve as the overall project coordinator in the Sherpa track. It has been said by the VC that there are two tracks, the Sherpa track and the finance track. So I coordinate our substance work in the Sherpa track, something, of course, which I will talk about. It was indicated that our G20 Sherpa, also Director General Mr. Zain Tango, would have loved to be here to deliver this statement, but due to an urgent cabinet meeting currently taking place, he unfortunately could not be with us. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Puleng Lebankula, Linkabula, okay. Linkabula, okay. Apologies. and the university leadership, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Omar Abdu, the Ambassador of Eritrea, the Ambassador in residence at UNISA, also my former boss and one of the finest diplomats ever produced by South Africa and the continent, Ambassador Nozipho Mkagato Diseko. We are quite happy of this appointment that has been made, and that the vast experience and institutional knowledge she possesses will be channeled into good use. So congratulations, Ambassador, for that appointment. Distinguished panelists, moderators, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the student community and leadership, distinguished members of the academia, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor to be invited to deliver this intervention at one of Africa's most prestigious institutions of higher learning, UNISA, where, of course, we will be addressing you on behalf of the G20 presidency on South Africa's state of readiness for the G20. Dare I say, we are no longer talking about the state of readiness, because as I deliver this statement, we are halfway into the G20 presidency, having taken over from Brazil in December last year. Thus far, a total of 53 meetings have already taken place under South Africa's presidency. And of course, we envisage that by the time we hand over the presidency to the United States, a total of 132 meetings would have been hosted, which of course will culminate in the Leaders' Summit, which will be convened in Johannesburg in late November, 22 to 23 November to be specific. Of course, the G20, we must emphasize, is a strategic forum of international economic cooperation. It comprises the largest and most powerful economies of the world, with 85% of the global GDP, of course, comprising of these economies that are part of the G20. So for South Africa, we do see the G20, especially as the last country from the global south to hold this presidency in its first cycle. So with our presidency, we'll mark the conclusion of the first cycle of G20 presidencies. So the second cycle of G20 presidencies will start next year with the presidency of the United States in 2026. So it is quite important that we consolidate the work that has been done under the three previous presidencies of the Global South. That is Indonesia in 2022, India in 2023, and last year Brazil, in really moving the needle on behalf of the continent and the Global South, which is why if you look at our priorities, which I will talk about, you will see that it is quite an ambitious developmental agenda. This year, we will be holding the pen, not only for South Africa, the continent, but for the marginalized people of the Global South. So given the strategic importance of this platform, it is our hope that come the Johannesburg Leaders Declaration, we would have that ambitious agenda which Cabinet has instructed us to pursue. Distinguished participants, a few would disagree with me when I posit that our presidency takes place amidst a volatile geopolitical climate. I think the VC in her intervention did talk to this. This dynamic climate has contributed to fostering a climate of distrust, thus threatening to unravel progress we have worked hard to address pressing global challenges like deepening inequality, unemployment, and poverty, resolving armed conflict, climate change, global pandemics, nuclear proliferation, amongst others. Signs of these divisions can be seen in the ongoing proliferation of trade wars between major economies, the deepening ideological differences, deepening political intolerance, reversal of progress on gender equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the continuation of active wars in no less than 3 continents in the world, including in the Sudan, Ukraine, and Gaza, amongst others. We must also emphasize that as we do this work in the G20 presidency, we need to be mindful of the fact that there are only 5 years remaining before the deadline set for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, Agenda 2030. The G20, therefore, has a significant role to play in fostering global cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships to achieve these goals. Our response as the G20 presidency to this global polycrisis, as the United Nations Secretary General has referred to it, is embedded in our theme for the presidency, that is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Through recommitting to the principles of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, we emphasize the need for dialogue, multilateralism, and finding common ground to address global challenges. By so doing, we would be staying true to our commitment of leaving no one behind. Distinguished participants, since officially assuming the presidency of the G20 on the 1st of December, as I indicated earlier, we have convened a total of 43 meetings thus far in both the Sherpa and Finance track working groups, including the 3 task forces. We have opted to create task forces rather than adding to more working groups. So for those who are not alert to what constitutes a task force is an initiative that is specific to a presidency of a given country in the G20. So we have opted, like Brazil, to establish task forces than adding more working group, something which I will address when I talk about one of the flagship legacy projects of South Africa's G20 presidency, which is the G20 at 20 review. I did say that we are the last country in the first cycle of the G20 to hold the presidency. So this presents an opportunity for South Africa to conduct a review of the G20, looking at how the group has fared during its first cycle, including the implementations of commitments that were adopted over the years, what working methods can be improved, and also how we can make the G20 more inclusive. So in addition then to these task forces, the president, when he launched the presidency, put forward 4 priorities that will anchor our work in the G20 presidency. 1, strengthening disaster resilience and response. 2, ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries. 3, mobilizing finance for a just energy transition. And 4, harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. And on this issue of critical minerals, I must say, in the presence of Ambassador Mkagato Diseko, who was the co-chair of the panel established by the Secretary General of the United Nations on critical energy transition minerals, or critical minerals, that the work we'll be doing under this 4th priority will be aligned to the report which was produced by that panel in 2024. I think in her intervention, maybe Ambassador will talk more about the work that was done in the panel. I'm not putting you on the spot, Ambassador. Yeah, so in addition then to these 4 priorities, we have established 3 task forces, as I indicated. The first task force, which is, by the way, meeting today as we convene here, is the task force on inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality. The second task force is the task force on food security. And then the third task force is the task force on artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. So these are the high-level priorities, but it doesn't mean that other issues which are of importance to the continent and the global south in general are not being addressed in the various working groups. Several cross-cutting issues do find expression in the work we are doing under our presidency, including the reform of the multilateral trading system, international financial architecture, and the strengthening of multilateral development banks. 2, seeking solutions to addressing climate change, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, advocating for gender equality, pursuing enhanced international tax cooperation and addressing illicit financial flows, exploring ways to increase the predictability, scale, and flows of climate finance, which is critical to enable the just transition and mitigation and adaptation efforts. Distinguished participants, from the recent meetings, it is important to note that whilst there are divergences on some issues, as to be expected in any multilateral platform, there is still overwhelming support for South Africa's priorities by G20 members. And we did get a sense of this when we hosted the first foreign ministers of the G20. The meeting we held in February in Nasrec, there was overwhelming support for the agenda we have put on the table. And recently in April, our Sherpa addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York on our priorities. That meeting was the most attended meeting since the G20 started briefing the United Nations General Assembly 6 years ago. And in that meeting also, there was overwhelming support for the agenda that South Africa has put on the table. I think that is very important to underscore, that both from the North and South, recalling, of course, that the G20 comprises of both developed economies and also economies from the global South. So both sides in the main have supported the agenda that South Africa has put on the table. And then to also talk about the issue of strengthening multilateralism. If we recall, this year the United Nations marks its 80th anniversary. And against the backdrop that we are seeing in some quarters where there is an attempt to push back on some important global commitments, such as Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, the global pandemic preparedness agreements, and also the aim to ensure a rules-based international multilateral system. As indicated, we are happy that under our presidency, the G20 has reaffirmed its commitment to strengthening multilateralism and ensure that all states act in a manner consistent with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. We have also, during the first foreign ministers meeting, underscored the need to reform the international system of global governance, as I stated. This, of course, includes the United Nations Security Council. Also, against the backdrop of the ongoing trade wars, so-called, when we convened the second Sherpa meeting in April last month, many delegations in the G20, including South Africa, expressed serious concerns about the resurgence of protectionism and unilateral measures that undermine the multilateral trading system, and reaffirmed, of course, the need to ensure a more fairer trading system that also has to do with the strengthening of the WTO and the dispute resolution mechanism. Let me now address the aspect related to making the G20 more inclusive and people-centered. You would recall that when President Ramaphosa launched the G20 presidency in Cape Town last year, he did indicate that South Africa's G20 will be a people's G20. So, of course, the main vessel of engagement by the grassroots civil society is through the engagement groups of the G20, which have been constituted over the years. I'm happy that under South Africa's presidency, there is a significant cooperation and collaboration between the engagement groups, which includes, of course, formations such as the T20, of which Prof. Philani Mthembu is one of the coordinators of, the B20, Business 20, Women's 20, C20, which is a civil society formation, Labor 20, Youth 20, and so on. When we are going to convene the third Sherpa meeting, which will be in June next month, we are going to follow the example which was initiated Brazil in terms of allowing engagement groups to make their formal submissions to the Sherpa track on issues they would want to be reflected in the leaders' declaration. In addition to that, because we believe that engagement groups are not fully representing the totality of the grassroots. So we have come up with an initiative called the G20 Social Summit, which will convene in November later this year. This will ensure that other underrepresented voices like persons with disabilities, traditional leaders, indigenous people, and so on, also get to contribute to the outcomes of what will be the Johannesburg Leaders Declaration. And then finally, the last aspect I wish to address is the centrality of Africa, the African agenda in South Africa's G20 presidency. You will recall that at the New Delhi Summit in 2023, the African Union was formally accepted as a member of the G20, thus becoming the 21st member, although of course it's still called the G20. So we will build on recent G20 initiatives undertaken in recent years, including, of course, issues such as debt relief to developing economies, with a particular emphasis on Africa. Under our presidency, we will also champion an elevated and broadened compact with Africa, which, of course, we will launch at a meeting to be held at the home of the African Union in Addis Ababa in July, end of July. So this compact with Africa will be driven in line with Agenda 2063 and is designed to facilitate economic reforms across the continent and also attract investment from pools of private sector funds in the global north. Also, our G20 presidency agenda is aligned to the 6 priorities of the African Union in the G20. And of course, these 6 priorities of the AU all find expression in the priorities and high-level deliverables I have mentioned. It is our belief that the challenges confronting us can only be resolved through cooperation, collaboration, and partnership, because no challenge and triumph exists in isolation. Under the guiding principle of Ubuntu, the belief that I am because we are reminded of the interconnectedness of humanity. It is this principle of Ubuntu that also underpins South Africa's leadership and vision for our G20 presidency. As we have done in the past and in many fora, South Africa intends to play a bridge-building role during its G20 presidency, overcoming geopolitical tensions and wide chasms amongst G20 members in order to reach consensus on its priorities and deliverables. South Africa will thus take a pragmatic approach to its G20 presidency, balancing its ambitious developmental agenda against the need to achieve a consensus on key issues. With our stated priorities and high-level deliverables, we believe we can deliver a transformative G20 presidency and leave a permanent legacy for South Africa, the African continent, and the global south. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Mguni. Let's give him another round of applause. That was very detailed. I was taking notes and somewhere my hand got tired. And I thought, well, we shall receive the written speech anyway, and therefore we'll have the detail that is required. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, that was really the point, for us to sit here and hear directly from the government what has happened so far, what is planned, what is coming, so that as a country and our international community that's with us, that we are able to then ensure, make our contributions, and ensure that the G20 South Africa 2025 is a success that it should be. Now, next, we're going to have a panel discussion hosted by my dear brother, I call him that, Tali Munzezi. He started here. I have very fond memories of when I first joined UNISA, and he was the head of UNISA Radio. And when we were starting the Thabo Mbeki Institute at the time, which has since grown to become the Thabo Mbeki School for Public and International Affairs. And he made sure that as the University of South Africa, the events that we are hosting around Africa Day, around International Women's Day, and all other events were properly covered by the electronic media, etc. And he ensured that we had live, I think it was the first time that as UNISA we have live SABC coverage of our Africa Day lecture. And that has continued through the years. So we are very proud, therefore, as the University of South Africa, that we are able to continue to collaborate with him, even though this time from the platform of DIRCO. Now I'm going to ask you to come to the podium, Mr. Tali, to bring forth the panelists and then to moderate our panel discussion. Thank you.
Vice Chancellor and Principal, thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Tali Munzezi, as Dr. Tong has mentioned. I just want to take this opportunity, Vice Chancellor, to say it's indeed a welcome home moment. For me, it's really a pleasure for me to be back at UNISA as well. And this moment, we have been at UNISA before, and many projects that we have done, including IOR and many different multilateral engagements that we have actually analyzed, even via ZK Methods as well. So thank you so much. Indeed, you asked us the question, what we do in terms of the depletion of resources that we are seeing as in the academia as far as funding is concerned. The good thing is that looking from outside in, is that UNISA also continue to look for funding. We have seen you in Africa, but also in alternative markets as well, attracting investment and also funding for the university and many different projects that the university is doing. So we want to thank you for that. My task is quite difficult, and because Mr. Mngoni has already outlined a number of issues as well that South Africa is grappling with. So now it's a moment for us to engage further on these important issues and say, how do we navigate these consensus building organizations as well? What are some of the nitty-gritties and some of the priority issues that are likely to dominate the discussions? What should South Africa elevate as far as these issues are concerned? So I want to invite into the podium, who will take the seat right on my left, Ambassador DIRCO, the ambassador in residence. So for me, it's welcome home to UNISA. Welcome home. I would like to invite you to come to the podium, and we know that you're ambassador, former ambassador at large for peace, security, and human rights and development. You have represented us in many various platforms as well, as far as representing your country, and we are glad that you continue to do that as well. And thank you so much. I would like to also invite Professor DIRCO. Prof, there's a number of times where we have invited you to avail yourself at Ubuntu Radio, and you have continued to engage us critically on the issues of Africa's engagement and South Africa's engagement with the continent and the globe. So Professor DIRCO, please join us in the floor. Let's give him a round of applause, please. I must mention that Principal and Vice Chancellor, you've asked a question whether we're embracing new technologies. So I've engaged with Dr. Bongiwe Mphahlele a number of times on X, as we know it, Twitter, whose owners we all know about. And we want to take this opportunity to invite her to join us to the podium from the Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us. And this time we are not speaking from a digital platform, we're actually speaking face to face. And from the onset, it really makes sense that we are launching this community outreach and also town hall outreach, because given UNISA's presence in the country and also in the continent as well, and that we are launching it here. So we are quite happy that we are launching it. Yeah. And as a matter of start, I'm going to start with you, Prof. Yes. Yeah, I'm going to start with you, right? Yes. In terms of just outlining for us, in the next, please go to town with your 3 minutes in terms of what are some, yes, in terms of what are some of the issues that you see are likely to be on the Leaders Summit going to November, because the number of working groups, as we have mentioned, but some of the things that for you are the major takeouts. You have engaged in many different platforms as well before, and we want to actually hear from you. You can also even take the podium if you wish. Yeah.
Can I thank the Vice Chancellor first and everybody?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Program Director. I was just trying to find out what liberties I have. Good morning, all. Let me begin by thanking the Vice Chancellor for her opening remarks. I'll come back to a question she raises about technology, and to say that Ambassador Nhlapwe and myself are delighted to be here and working with a university that says openly that it is distinctly Pan-African, and it is committed to working with government in a collaborative manner, but also ensuring broader understanding of critical issues such as foreign policy. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I know I speak for him, he's not here. We had a little argument between myself and my colleague. Actually, let me say I've come to replace Mr. Tali at UNISA. He's gone to DIRCO, I'm his replacement. we had a little argument, a light-hearted one, where I was drawing to his attention that this is not the first time the G20 is coming to South Africa. Not only are we a founder member, but we have actually chaired the G20 in 2007 before it transmuted into this current format that it is in. And South Africa then pointed out to the G20 that we needed to look at the bureaucratic structure of the G20, the importance of which is in holding the decisions and tracking the implementation of the outcomes of the G20 summits. So you seem to be building on that, and I'm heartened that you've got a theme that resonates with the theme of Brazil and picks up on where India left off. And two things that you say. South Africa is the pen holder. That is really very important to understand in terms of the responsibility that DIRCO actually shoulders, or South Africa shoulders, in producing an outcome document that is reflective of a variety of issues. So the Vice Chancellor says, you didn't say much about technology. And I think that is a really very valid question that speaks to the fact that uniquely, as before, I think, 2007, it was just before the financial meltdown. What necessitated the upgrade to summit level was the financial meltdown. So there were undercurrents that were on which the work of the G20 was taking place. And I believe that those undercurrents are much more stronger than they were in 2007. So as the pen holder that is supposed to produce the outcome document, where everybody will recognize themselves, Africa and everything, the ground on which you are to build the bridge that you seek to build is shifting. And why? And it has to do with the fundamental changes that have happened in our lives in the last 15 to 10 years, 15 years to the current period, centering around technology. The structure of the global economy has changed fundamentally. No longer is what it was. Trade moves in different ways. People are doing things in different ways. And when you get that, I think it then becomes easy to build the pillars of what might be an outcome that begins a process of adjustment for all. A process of adjustment for all. All of us, when we wake up, we rush for our phones. Look at what we have. As we speak, we're enabled by technology, at the center of which are critical minerals. Whether you like it or not, critical minerals. The largest consumer of critical minerals is artificial intelligence. The economy of the United States of America is not where it should be. I usually say there's method to Trump's madness. He gets this, he understands this. That there's a huge, huge gap that he has to catch up with between the US and China. This is a fundamental thing. This is what is happening, that he's going to actually, if he can't force China back into a bottle, he's going to try and disrupt, but it's not going to be easy. The essence of what is needed is this catch-up technologically to have agility, and fundamental to it are the critical minerals that the continent has. And it is my hope that the continent at the G20 will not be served on a plate. To open its resources and avail them at a cost to it. So being a pen holder is really very important. It's about language and understanding where the tensions are in the making of a consensus document. It's easy when all are agreed. Europe has got its own challenges from where I sit, again, from where the work that I've been doing on critical minerals. The disadvantage it has is so huge that you would wake up with statements such as, we need China to transfer technology to Europe. This unknown is unknown. It used to be us developing countries, they used to say to Western countries, please transfer technology. But now it's the Europeans that are saying China needs to transfer technology to Europe. But at the same time, the responses to this, I think it was Europe that began the tariff cycle in its unilateral imposition of the CBAM, external to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations talk. So all of us woke up overnight faced with a huge tariff for our goods to Europe that had been arbitrarily and unilaterally structured. My European counterparts tell me that, Ambassador, we are facing an existential crisis. It's about their survival in the same way that it's about the existential survival of the United States of America. So in relation to the themes, can we expect that the various components of the G20 will work easily with equality? What does equality mean now for the Europeans, or the different elements within the G20, to provide a basis for the pen holder to cohere material that will be part of the outcome document? Solidarity was taken to the extreme by COVID-19, where again the South was struggling to get, practical action on vaccines and the patents, and we never got that. What is our understanding of solidarity? What would be the basis of material in this shifting ground that South Africa has to solidify language that will give hope to people. And the last part is sustainability. And I like the way in which India brought back the understanding of sustainability as we have come to know it as entailing the social, economic, and environment, the three pillars of sustainable development. Climate change is external to that and is a regimen that stands on its own. Even on sustainability, the challenges that are based on national socioeconomic and security interests. Argentina has its own problems, but it's notable that Argentina is voting against resolutions on sustainable development. Have we understood the shifts in the ground to prepare sufficiently for the negotiations of a successor program to the SDGs or not? So the various interests, South Africa is managing interests of, within the G20, of parties that are feeling under extreme pressure and may not be amenable to consensual language that locks them in to a particular space. Not that the outcomes of the G20 are legally binding on all member states, no, but they are norm setting and they're critical in the generation of narrative that is vital for supporting things like multilateralism. So I like the fact that we have a people's G20 external. I'm hoping that it will be configured working with different parties so that we say, okay, even if these leaders fail to say something, we are going to say something about the world and what must happen from the perspective of we, the people. Because after all, as you said, the population, the number of, the countries of the G20, especially the developing ones, carry over 50% of the population of the world, and probably over 75% of the population of the poor in the world. So that one, I'm hoping when you conceptualize it, you'll get people from other regions, GRULAG, and you already have a ready-made structure in the ECOSOC of the African Union. For me, I'd like to hear more, and this is where the conversation with academics should be, social actors should be, so that they can actually approach the matter from unearthing the challenges. Because I'll finish on this. The G20 is a plurilateral structure, an intergovernmental structure. South Africa cannot wake up and say, here is an outcome document. No, it's going to have to be negotiated. So that's why you say at the pen holder, language matters. Language matters. And the management, I think, of expectations is really very important. What is the source of this global volatility? It comes from somewhere. And I think when you get that, it might be probably easy to pin the American downs. They are taking over from us. Are they going to change the G20 and reduce it to what it was before, or what? I don't know, I don't care. But I think I care that we have mechanisms that are the basis for continued collaboration on critical issues, where developing countries also have a voice. I'm not quite sure what I said, but I think I should shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I've just got a cue. It's about norms and standards. It's quite important. You have said a lot, a mouthful, and I've seen that even my hand is painful from writing all the notes. And it's quite important in terms of these questions that you asked, in terms of how do we navigate. What sets South Africa apart? What's the sort of experience that South Africa has that will say we're going to rally around and manage these issues? And given the fact that South Africa has a myriad of experience in negotiation, different multilateral platform as well, say, besides being presidency of the G20, what are some of the, what serves South Africa well? I think that's where we're going to take it as well, to say, what will set South Africa apart and say by November, we say this came from South Africa's presidency as well, as we have seen in various presidency that has preceded us as well. I would like to take this opportunity to invite Prof. Jack Coetzee for initial inputs as well. Prof?
Good. It's almost afternoon. Good morning, colleagues and friends and visitors. I think this is the way to do it, the protocol at the university. We are all colleagues. I think following on the ambassador's views, which are, and opinions and responses, which are exceptionally valuable in terms of understanding where we stand at the moment, I think the first point for me is, well, we call today a town hall meeting, which is very American, by the way, is how many of us actually knew about the G20 before this year? And how many South Africans know about the G20 before this year? I guess not many. So the question is therefore, and what we have heard already this morning, is what's the difference between the G20 and many of the other big multilateral international organizations like the UN? What should the G20's focus or agenda be, which is going to be the focus of this year in terms of South Africa's initiatives, which the others can't do, or cannot do well enough, or is not focused enough on? And I think this is a difficult question, because the one danger is that of so-called mission creep, that the G20 tries to be much more than what it was originally supposed to be. Now, those of you who know the G20's history knows that it was formed around about 1999. It was after the economic crisis, the different countries came together, and it was not initially the presidents or the prime ministers, it was only the ministers of finance and the governors of their central banks, and out of that developed. So I think that provides for us a type of understanding of what's the core business of the G20. And that is, let's be frank, economic and financial matters at a global level. How to deal with issues which the UN cannot really do effectively, or the UN institutions, agencies and others like the World Bank, IMF, the WTO and the ILO and others cannot do effectively. Secondly, 20. It sounds a bit small out of almost 200. It's about 10% of the total number of states of the world. So will the rest of the world allow this 20 plus, 22 maybe now, with the AU and the European Union also there, to take decisions on their behalf? So it must be that this grouping is something which has an authority, which has a position, which can have an influence and an impact on the international community in general. I think what is important is that it has become very diverse. The membership of the G20 is not dominated only by the North. It's full from European countries plus the European Union, but Asia and Southeast Asia and the East is actually the majority. Places like Japan, like China, like India, like Indonesia and others, they are the biggest single group within the G20. The Middle East plus Turkey too. So, and then in the case of South Africa plus the African Union. So it is quite a diverse group. But it is, at the same time, one should say it's not completely, let's say, representative of all the areas. So the task is for the G20 to develop a global credibility, a global representativeness that other countries will say, well, we feel to a large extent represented, or part being that our views and interests are to a large extent being attended to in the government, in the G20. So this is, I would say, some of the points of departure. Take, for example, India. It's now the number 5 in the G20. Brazil number 9. So it means that countries close to us, in terms of, let's say, the Global South, in terms of the BRICS groups, are quite prominent members within the G20. I think the other point which has emerged quite prominently now is that South Africa does not necessarily introduce a new agenda. It's a lot about continuation of where Indonesia and Brazil and India have been already. And it is about deepening and providing a very specific focus also. And then there's going to be guests. It's not only going to be the 20, so there will be different other countries that will form part of this group that will also will be there and expand actually the sort of the focus of it. Now, the other group that we haven't talked about yet is the G7. The G7 is another group that does a lot of what the G20 can do, but in a more informal way. And South Africa is very often invited to be part of that over the years. President Mbeki, President Zuma, and now President Ramaphosa also. So I think this is again something that one has to take into account, is that there are different groups that are sort of speaking to each other, in alignment to each other, hopefully in alignment to each other. I want just to say a few words about the G20 and global governance. I think what the G20 emphasizes is the principle that South Africa's foreign policy also emphasizes is multilateralism. But that it is necessary to reform the form of multilateralism that exists at the moment. Together with multilateralism is that of what I would call global equity, not only global equality, but rather global equity, to address the structural imbalances at a global level, and to also to address over-representation and under-representation. The problem with all of this is that the international community is not like a national community. And that is that the relationships within the global community is very much based on or influenced by power relations. Big powers versus smaller powers versus medium powers, which together with the notion of states that insist still on their sovereignty and their self-determination. So it means that they are there, but on their own terms. They are not bound by certain common rules or legislation or norms and principles that are enforceable. I think this is the point where the G20 comes in. The G20 is not an organization like the United Nations with headquarters in New York, with a Secretary General, with a big secretariat that can implement. It's an organization that moves from year to year to a next chairing country. And I think this is one of the issues about the efficiency of the G20 ultimately. And I think what we've heard now about the review of the first cycle is something which is hugely important, because it can become simply a talk shop. And that it is a way of each country that is that year the presiding or chairing country, that they want to showcase themselves to the rest of the world. And the question is, to what extent are there, in terms of global governance, which inherently has this problem of enforceability of decisions, about the binding nature of decisions, and what is the punitive elements that exist if countries don't comply? So I think this is one of the components. The changing patterns of power as a result of emerging multipolarity. And that's one point I want to emphasize. And I think this is an issue within the G20. It's an issue now even within BRICS. Is that there's new emerging powers. India is a good example. That's not anymore compliant and that sees itself as part of either the East or the West or the global South. They want to be themselves. And I think Africa is very much moving in that same direction. That is, I think, where South Africa's policy about non-alignment to a large extent comes from. is to say that in the end, I can visualize that in the end, instead of two poles, whether it is the east of the west of the Cold War, or whether now the north and the south, we can have 4 or 5 poles. And that will create an interesting interaction between different formations and overlap. Take, for example, India. India is a member of BRICS, but India is also a member of the Quad, together with the US, Japan, and South Korea. So where is India in terms of the polarity? It's very much standing in a sense on its own. And I think these will become part of the challenges of the G20, of how to manage and accommodate these new emergences in the global situation. Maybe my last point, there's many things I really want to talk about, but is the fact that the G20 to a large extent depends on the acceptance of globalization. Some of you who are more coming from the left will challenge this. But what do we see lately is that a global pushback against globalization. Brexit is a good example of that, and others, of saying that we don't want to be part, and that's where the trade wars come from. And I think this is to a large extent also what the position of the US is at the moment. They don't want to be bound by the World Trade Organization, the International Labour Organization, climate change agreements, and so on. So I think for this, setting this scene means that South Africa as having to manage all of these as a tough task. I think maybe just to, as a concluding point, is I think South Africa, in order to see results, should not be over-ambitious about what it wants to address. If we can focus on specific issues, reach an agreement, even including the US, which will be a challenge, but that is something that comes out of this year, which we can say, this is our legacy as South Africa in the particular context. I think then we would have done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I really appreciate your input. It's also important to just acknowledge, as we've mentioned, that the G20 is People's G20. We know that in the coming months, among other events we're going to have, this month is the Women's 20, which the inception meeting takes place later in Cape Town. So I'm happy that the co-chair, Dr. Sindisa, she's here as well. So we are happy that you are also involved in these important meetings as well. Also, we are looking forward to what's going to transpire later on in the month. I want to take this opportunity to invite you, also Dr. Bongiwe Mpatlele, just in terms of your initial input as well. I know that we've taken more, which is giving us more issues to deliberate on, but give us some initial thoughts as well. We can also come to them. Thank you so much. And I'm thinking I'm calling doctors now. I'm feeling left out, VC. I need to pursue that PhD. I'm feeling left out.
Thank you, Charlie. By the time you register, I'll be ready to be your supervisor. I want to take this opportunity to greet our very important VC, our principal, our mother. We appreciate you, and also the dignitaries from DIRCO and all government departments. I want to greet all the excellencies, the ambassadors, and also the diplomats who are in our presence. I think what has come out in the conversations about G20 in the last 5 or 6 months since South Africa ascended the presidency is one, obviously the issue of South Africa taking forward the agenda of the Global South. But another issue is South Africa also making sure that Africa speak with one voice. So this has come out more lately because South Africa is also committed to engaging more with African countries or the AU on issues that affect Africa, because it's important that South Africa elevate or prioritize those issues, as the AU is also a member of the G20. But it's also important for me to highlight that as Africa and South Africa try to speak with one voice. They also should understand that they will have to channel, or they will have to channel an African agency. However, in this African agency, they have to define what this African agency should look like within the changing G20 forum. As you have seen that the G20 is changing, with its key members distancing itself and also showing disinterest in the G20 activities. So this means change is coming. So how does South Africa and the AU channel the African agency within this changing global forum? As well as how do South Africa and Africa assert Africa agency within the changing global order? How do we promote Africa within an order that is moving towards unilateralism, and also an order that is somehow marginalizing Africa and developing countries more through the trade wars? So these are some of the things that South Africa should consider as they continue and moving closer towards the G20 summit. Having said that, I want to say that South Africa's chosen theme of solidarity, inclusion, and equity does not only reflect on the country's local perspective, but it also speaks to what South Africa has always promoted, which is justice, peace, and human rights in Africa and beyond. So in this context, South Africa has a dual responsibility. They have to represent the continent and also try to shape a more equitable global order moving forward. But this will be very challenging for South Africa. So for South Africa to maximize gains within the G20, they do need to prioritize continental cohesion. So they need to work together with the African countries and the AU. They need to strengthen the AU's coordinating system. We know that the AU is a new member and is not yet a strategic and a competent actor. So South Africa should also invest in strengthening the AU as a competent member within the G20. However, as South Africa continues to promote these priorities, there are also other issues within the continent that might, or they threaten to undermine what South Africa is seeking to achieve together with the AU. And here I'm talking about the ongoing tensions, the ones that South Africa has with Rwanda on the DRC issue. Also the tensions between South Africa and Morocco on the Western Sahara issues. Also the silent tensions that are going on between South Africa and Nigeria on continental leadership issues. So in order for South Africa to successfully organize itself with other African countries and be able to speak with one voice, they need to manage these tensions so that these do not move the attention of South Africa or distract the leadership of South Africa within the G20. Because it's important that South Africa, together with African countries, they have a collective advocacy. They're able to raise these African issues and Global South issues together. They're able to have a strong negotiating power within the forum of the G20. So without this, it will be difficult for South Africa to be able to consolidate or be able to reach consensus on important African economic development issues. So on the issue of tensions that are going on in South Africa, I thought while South Africa is preparing for the summit, it is also important to look at other opportunities. There could have been an opportunity to raise or link violence that is going on in the continent, link it to economic development and how it affects or deter development in the continent. There's a lot of violence that is going on. Let's look at Mozambique, for instance. The distraction that has happened has derailed and affected the tourism industry within that country and affected economic development immensely. And while within that context of violence, within South Africa, we have a crisis of gender-based violence. And this could be linked to the economic inclusion and economic empowerment of women. To say that we as South Africa, we need to have resources, we need to put together systems, we need to put together institutional capacity that we can use to ensure that we empower women, not just through economy, but we create safe spaces for women to be able to participate in economic activities, not of the continent, but also of the global community. So without addressing these issues of gender-based violence in our country and in the continent, it will be, it not be difficult, but it will be challenging to promote financial inclusion of women in the continent and also in the global south. Also speaking of opportunities that South Africa could explore while they move towards the summit, there is the upcoming, the fourth Financing for Development conference that will take place in Spain. Now this is an opportunity for South Africa to garner support from powerful forums like the G7, the G77, and also powerful partners like the EU and individual countries. In the absence or in the disinterest of the US, South Africa has an opportunity to strengthen or build new partnerships with the EU, which seems to show appetite on issues like climate change, on issues like energy transition, on issues like international financial system reform. So those are the issues that South Africa should maximize on, because there is appetite within the powerful and also the partners that can support what South Africa is trying to achieve through the G20. Also, women financial inclusion should be promoted at this conference because it's very much important. The gender issue within the G20 should be strong. The message should be strong to say that women need to be supported. Mr. Mnguni spoke about what South Africa is promoting in terms of building resilience. Within the resilience theme, there are so many business women in South Africa who are struggling because they are unable to recover from disasters that come as a result of climate change. So if South Africa is able to promote financial inclusion from that perspective, this will change people, marginalized groups within South Africa, the women who seem to be neglected in the rural villages, the women in the townships who do not participate in these engagements, who are not heard, and whose voices seem to be quiet because they don't have platforms where they can express the challenges and the interventions that can be constituted by South Africa. So with this conference coming, I want South Africa to continue to engage the T20, engage different civil societies, and be able to reach and understand what issues that can we promote at this conference that can have an impact on the ordinary South Africans. Moving on to the risk that South Africa should anticipate moving towards the summit is the issue that has been mentioned by the ambassador. Anticipate what it will look like to hand over to the United States of America. How is South Africa preparing for this? And should there be, should United States of America decide not to take over, how are they going to make sure that there is a smooth transition and also make sure that the legacy of South Africa that they're trying to promote, the issues of equality, the issues of inclusion and sustainability, how are they going to make sure those issues do not die off after they hand over to the next presidency? So this is important to consider right now. Start preparing, start negotiating. I know that the president is putting a lot of effort and resources into negotiating and mending relations with our partners in the United States. So also build up on what has been created already, so that we make sure that South Africa, the first African country to host a summit and the first African country to preside over a G20, has this legacy to carry on forward, and it can boost us as we move forward to be able to stand on our own and be able to speak with one voice as Africa. I'm going to stand, okay, just lastly, I want to say that as we are taking this to the people, I want us to consider the marginalized group that I've mentioned, the people in the villages and the people in the townships. Let's make sure there is representation, and let's make sure that their voices are heard. Thank you.
It's very important that, Ambassador, we continue our engagement to look at what are they say it's a People's Summit as well. I want to give you an opportunity to expand on how we're going to reach this consensus. Prof was talking about the bulk will be on economy, but also, as we have seen from many different tracks, as Mr. has highlighted, in terms of social issues as well, that South Africa took a responsibility to make sure that the issue of social responsibility, but the bulk of it will be economy. How does South Africa reach a consensus, particularly on the economy, given the geopolitical challenges that we have and the conflicting interests in various regions? But in terms of reaching consensus as well, how are we going to negotiate in various tracks from the Sherpa track as well? Tea break. We're just about to conclude. We'll take a few break in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Yes, Ambassador, if you can, yes. You can speak while you're seated, yes.
Thank you, Program Director. If I understood you very well, you were asking how South Africa can facilitate a consensual outcome document. South Africa is not going to create the consensus. As I said, this is an intergovernmental process, a negotiation where there's a huge contestation about the issues. But South Africa's responsibility is in the mastery of the management of the negotiations and be ready with language to steer everybody towards an end goal where you've got an acceptable document. We've done that. I mean, many people forget that we're the authors of the Paris Agreement, when it was really very, very difficult, literally very difficult. The mere idea of an agreement on climate change. So we had to apply our minds. One, the US didn't want to have any agreement at all. I would tell officials to watch out if the US delegation was coming when we're talking about the agreement, and alert me, and as soon as the Americans were approaching, I would change the subject and say, well, this and that and that and that and that. But now you would think that they were the authors of the Paris Agreement. And the trick here is in the style with which South Africa does things, you know, with magnanimity, that you draw the most difficult parties and make them responsible for the success of the endeavor or the enterprise. So a lot will depend on the skill of South Africa in language, in understanding the sensitivities also. You cannot just dismiss binding constraints that countries have as a result of the fundamental changes that have happened in the global economy. What is bothering the US is the state of the Rust Belt, the state of the motor manufacturing industry in the United States, as it competes with new players that are producing products that are highly marketable, but highly advanced in the composition of, in the technologies that they carry. So what do you offer the US? This is why the US wants globalization to stop, for them to catch up and climb up the ladder again, back again. Equally, Europe has got its own challenges with access to critical minerals in order to be able to revamp its economy and upgrade its competitiveness, you know, the comparative advantage of these countries. South Africa manages these countries with a knowledge of their binding constraints and their issues, but guided by an ultimate objective of what should come out of that in relation to the theme. I just want to finish by saying this. We need to understand Africa as a player globally very well. I am very proud of the capabilities diplomatically of the continent of Africa. On climate change, it has the best negotiators, the best, who understand the game. Africa has been a part of the G20 since its inception, but participating from a programmatic point of view. When I was the Sherpa, I moved with the Sherpa of NEPAD, who negotiated. So when we say Africa needs agency, that is a mischaracterization of capabilities that already exist in the continent. We've only been free since 1994. Africa has been engaged in multilateral issues long before then. So when we say we need to give Africa agency, I don't understand that. Africa has always had a Sherpa who negotiated the outcome document of the G20. And I remember Madame Diouf, but it was located in Nepal. Now the reconfiguration of African representation has changed. It's located in Etim. The Sherpa is in Etim. And furthermore, the African Union has got a multidisciplinary team inside that is prepared and pulls on all of the issues where member states have agreed on inclusion and supported by the structures of the African Union, the committees, STCs. We can't just wake up and say Africa is a newcomer. That is not an accurate characterization of the continent. Nor can we give the impression that Africa has no agency, doesn't know what it is doing. 54 countries that come together and battle issues and come up with common positions for FFD4, for the UNFCCC in Brazil. The question is, how do we understand Africa's participation, how Africa has represented itself? To a great extent, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a victory for Africa. What I know about the South is that when Africa is disorganized, that paralyzes the G77 in China completely. So again, the Paris Agreement, at the core of that, is what I would call the agency of the African continent. I can still remember the coordinators of vital groups on finance, mitigation, adaptation. They coined the idea of a global goal on adaptation, African negotiators. Now, that comes with a risk. And what I remember in Paris people saying is that it's difficult to negotiate with the G77 because it is so united. And that unity came from the continent in clarity about issues. So what we need to be looking at is who is investing in fragmenting the unity of the African Union, because it serves them best when the African Union doesn't know what it is doing, because it has a partnership with so-and-so and a partnership with so-and-so. Everybody who's meeting with Africa wants to have language on critical minerals. South Korea, in the meeting with them, African continent, an entire continent, you insist you want in the declaration to have language on critical minerals. Why? That's why I said it's important not to hand Africa off on a plate. TICA, Japan. Again, a meeting between heads of states and Africa, there must be language on critical minerals. I can cite the number of partnership agreements where lately it's the norm to insist that there must be language on critical minerals. So those are the things that we should watch. What is undermining the coherence of the African Union? Because when Africa is on top of its game, the G77 literally wins its battles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I know that, Prof. Andrews, you will have your work cut out in your next session as well. And I'm quite happy that in terms of your session, we'll be able to even take questions, and also we'll have an opportunity for the panelists to also engage further on these nuances as well that are coming up as well. So thanks so much, Ambassador, for that. Prof, could you, just in terms of concluding, just because you are fine, we will take the further discussions as well. I want to take this opportunity because of time, and with your permission, Your Excellency, we want to take that important tea break, and then we will resume. But I want to call upon the podium Dr. Tong as well to take us to what will be happening. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to handle this important panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. Thank you, my dear panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running a bit out of time, but as you can see, the quality of the conversation is so rich and wonderful. So from that point of view, no regrets. However, we need to also be mindful of health and, you know, our need for nourishment. So indeed, let's take a 15-minute tea break. Tea is served right here. You can be able to bring your tea over to the table so we don't lose too much time. May I then please invite you to tea, 15 minutes, and we reconvene right here. On both ends, to make it easier, there is both that end so that we don't have too much congestion in this side. This table's going here could take that direction, and tables going here that direction. VC, I'm not, yeah, there she is, yes. Our dear will lead our main table first, and we shall follow. Our table will go, and our ambassadors are also welcome, yes. Maybe just to manage the congestion, we love that this room, you know, we can both have an event here and serve at the same time. However, there can be quite a bit of movement, sometimes uncoordinated. Let's see, yes. Yes. Okay. Yes. But other tables, please proceed from this end that way. Please proceed.